Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View. I am your host, Nick Pitts, on this Millennial Roundtable of Tuesday, May 7th. That's right. The Millennial Roundtable is on a Tuesday now. Yes, on a Tuesday. Thank you so much for those of you that have made your way over, gravitated from the Wednesday Millennial Roundtable to the now brand new Tuesday Millennial Roundtable on this National Teacher Day, National Foster Care Appreciation Day. There is so much to celebrate and also so much to talk about, and so grateful that you have decided to join us today. And joining me in studio today, I've got David Fraga here in the Dallas studio, as well as Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute. Chelsey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you guys today?
You know, I cannot complain. I can't complain whatsoever. And I don't know if it would do me any good if I did anyway. And so, but nevertheless, we are going to be talking a little bit today about what seems to be kind of a kind of depressing, I guess you would say, depressing surge in the headlines right now. We're continuing to see little bouts of racism that continue to populate our headlines. And so I touched on this a little bit during the daily briefing. I want to expound on it a little bit more today. During our first hour, we'll be talking about specifically what happened in Tennessee. There's a top aide for the Speaker of the House in the Tennessee State Legislature got caught with cocaine in his office and then racist text messages. And now he has decided to resign. But that kind of goes in line with some of the rise of anti-Semitism that continues to populate not only here in the U.S. through violent acts such as in California, and then in Pittsburgh, obviously, from a year ago, but also just some of the words that are being utilized by some of the individual freshmen in the Congress right now. Specifically, there are a couple of individuals that will point out that they've made some certain remarks and just raising the question and raising the specter of, is this a growing trend we're starting to see relative to racism? I thought this was put to bed along with Jim Crow, but it does not appear as though that's happening. And then as we make our way into the show, we'll also be talking a little bit about the tragic passing of the 37-year-old Christian author Rachel Held Evans. There's been just a lot of talk and an outpouring of support. I even saw where Hillary Clinton tweeted something on her just right before we went on air as well. So her influence is extended outside of the Christian walls. And so what can we learn from her? What can we remember about her life, some of the contributions that she made? There's a couple of individuals that have really penned some pretty pressing op-eds. Specifically, I'm thinking Jonathan Merritt in USA Today, John Stonestreet in Christianity Today. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And then finally, environment. Do we have a problem? There is 1 million species, according to a new UN report, that are on the brink of going extinct. And I'm a rapper, and I didn't even know it. That was pretty good, wasn't it, Jill?
Oh, I missed it.
Crying shame.
I didn't catch that.
Shame. Maybe I'll run it back. Who knows? And so we're going to kind of talk about the implications, especially from a Christian perspective on this. But before we go ahead and get started, we need to pause and we need to celebrate for reasons to celebrate. It is National Teacher Day. And so I thought, let's make this a fun exercise, shall we? And so let's think through the numerous teachers that we've all have put up with us. And so, Chelsey, we're going to lead off with you. When you think about all of the teachers that you had, I need to, what teacher in particular stands out, one, and then two, Why does this individual stand out?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I had so many really
Okay.
to think back through. Can you come back to me?
Oh, yeah.
while
I can
think?
totally come back to you. David, David, what are you thinking?
Oh, goodness. I would say on the top of my head, like right now, I could think about my third grade teacher,
Okay.
Mrs. Timothy.
Okay.
Yeah, she, that was the same year I got glasses. And I remember she was wearing glasses, and I was so insecure getting glasses that
Yeah.
year. Because I was like, oh, no one else has glasses in my grade or in my class.
Oh.
So I was
man.
I was just, bringing
What a
something new.
4 eyes, am I right, everybody?
Hey, man.
That's
But
I
it
got
was,
glasses on.
So she was just someone who really encouraged me. She was someone who also taught my older brother and my older sister. And so she was really close to my family just growing up. So
That's good.
yeah, she'd always encourage me. And then obviously college professors, profound at DBU. Ross O'Brien was one of them. Changed my whole perspective of business and how it can be used as missions. So
That's good.
yeah.
Okay, I've got mine.
Okay.
4th grade.
4th grade.
Mrs. Campbell,
Miss Campbell.
solid Christian lady. 4th grade is an awkward time for girls with curly hair, and she really helped me power through.
Did you have curly hair?
Oh, I have very curly hair, but
Do
I
you really?
super process it so nobody ever knows. But, in the 4th grade, when girls just they're starting to hit their attitude streaks, and she was just always very kind, and she ended up being at our church, so ended up being a big part of my, spiritual side too.
That's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. Okay, so I cannot. I mean, when I think about teachers from all throughout my years, so teaching Nick was the pits. No, is that bad? So I can't help but think about Mr. McGee. So Mr. McGee was my 6th grade teacher. Mr. McGee, and that was just during the time in Tennessee, you started switching classes during that time. So you weren't just in one class all day. And so Mr. McGee was my homeroom teacher. And I remember Mr. McGee just spoke so much life into me in particular. So everything from the music classes that I was taking to the writing classes that I was taking to history, he really did identify, outside of just missing the mark completely on music. There's no part of me that has a musical bone in my body. But the teaching, or from the history side and then the writing side, he spoke so much life into me at that time. And it was deep calling from deep, right? Identifying that which I never uttered to anyone else. But to know that somebody else saw those things in me that I believed is pretty significant for me, and really was profound and did shape me to a large degree. And so I am forever grateful for those individuals. And then also, we can't help but also think about all the teachers out there as well. So we just want to say thank you so much for the efforts that you make, especially as you come up on the end of the year right now. Know that the work that you're doing now might seem thankless, but there are countless individuals, us among them, that would say thank you so much for what you do in and day out in our education system. Keenly aware of the fact that teachers are experiencing significant levels of burnout right now. There was one study that indicated that 94% of teachers are paying money out of their own pockets to be able to fund their classroom, on average of around $479 a year. And so I can't think of another job that requires you to pay your own money in order to be able to do the necessary work you've been tasked to do. But we are keenly aware and grateful for teachers, and I know that we're not the only ones. The Texas House and Texas Senate, I think the Texas Senate just passed a bill last night relative to a teacher pay raise, upwards of $5,000. We'll see if that actually works its way out in conference committee. But nevertheless, we're going to have to go to a break right now. But when we come back from the break, we'll transition from National Teacher Day, and we'll make our way over to some of the other issues that are pressing. Specifically, I want to talk about this race issue right now. Racism continues to populate the headlines in all too tragic of circumstances. And so I want us to be able to kind of explore what is with this recent surge of racism, even among Christian ranks, and where is it coming from? How might we be able to stem it? And so we'll be talking a little bit more about that. But we've got to take a break right now. But when we come back from the break, more from the Millennial Roundtable on a Tuesday. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
The Supreme Court justices may be forgiven for having a feeling of deja vu. For the third time, the justices had to deal with a case in which the president was given power by Congress and then challenged because he used that power. First, it was the travel ban. Then it was the president's national emergency declaration in order to build the wall. Finally, it were the oral arguments about whether a citizenship question should be put in the 2020 census. All three of these cases have a number of things in common. The Constitution grants certain powers to Congress. Congress delegates those powers to the president. Then President Trump uses those powers in a way that Democrats don't like, and a federal court case ensues. You probably have already thought of a solution to this ongoing problem. Congress should stop delegating their power to the president. I'll deal with that topic in my next commentary, but you might wonder why Congress keeps doing this. Here's a secret that few political commentators mention. When the leader of your party is in power, you don't have a problem when he uses that power. But as soon as someone of the other party, especially if it's Donald Trump, gets into power, you go crazy. This case before the Supreme Court should be fairly simple. Congress delegated to the Secretary of Commerce the power to determine the form and content of the census. You may not like what he decided, but that's what the law stipulated decades ago. David French, in a recent commentary, says here is where we see the biggest contrast between progressive and conservative approaches to jurisprudence. The liberal progressive sees the problem and demands the court fix the problem. The conservative looks at the same pattern and says, if you don't like the law, change it. Congress has had numerous opportunities to change the law and did not. Therefore, I predict that at least 5 conservative justices on the court will rule in favor of the Trump administration. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hey, welcome back to Point of View. I am your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you have decided to join us. Joined in studio today by Chelsey Youman and David Fraga. And so we have been talking a little bit about National Teacher Day, but we're going to transition now to talk about kind of a depressing, I guess you would say, topic that continues to populate our headlines today. So yesterday we found out, news broke that the chief of staff for the Tennessee Speaker of the House has resigned. Reports came out that he was an individual that, one, had done cocaine in his legislative office, but also, two, had sent racist text messages. A number of racist text messages, I might add. Not only did he send the messages, but also other reports indicate that even on a mobile payment app known as Venmo, this is an individual that had sent some questionable and racist comments he had put on Venmo as well. And unfortunately, this individual was a Christian as well. And couple that with what's happening right now, just a couple of weeks ago that we learned a shooter who will remain nameless because he does not deserve mention. But what his actions did indicate is he's an individual that went to a Presbyterian church, and his dad was an elder at this Presbyterian church, but he decided to act out, and he went on a shooting rampage on the last day of Passover and killed two Jewish individuals as well as injured 4 others. And so that raises the question, one might add, as we're continuing to see more and more of these headlines and these stories that are making the news today, are we seeing a rise in racism here in the U.S.? And so I'm going to put that question. Chelsey, listen, I'll go with you first. I mean, it's one thing for us to, what I like to refer to, and I think others as well, nitpick, right? To be able to pick outlier stories and to project that onto the larger narrative. But it seems as though this is increasingly becoming more prevalent of individuals, one, that are speaking degrading words onto other individuals based upon the color of their skin, and then in certain instances going so far as to enact violent acts against them simply because not the content of their character but the color of their skin. What do you agree that there seems to be a rise in this right now? And if so, like, what contributes to this?
It's hard for me to know statistically.
Okay.
You know, that's a statistical question. Is there an actual rise, and how do we measure that? I know that we've had for the last few years, even, you know, the Black Lives Matters movement came out. So we've definitely see it become another heightened point that really, I think there's been a huge campaign and effort to continue to highlight the racism that does exist and to continue to push to eradicate it from our society, which I do think is a worthy goal if we go about it the right way.
Yeah.
And I know that anti-Semitism is on the rise statistically. Acts of violence against the Jewish community worldwide are on the rise. I know that you can't even wear your yarmulke in public in certain parts of Europe without being physically assaulted. So I know that that's on the rise. So really, I can't say what accounts for that other than America as a whole, I think, has grown in this. And we've learned a lot from our history over the last long history, speaking out over the last 150 years. I think we've come leaps and bounds, but that doesn't mean there aren't still some corners of our society that those sentiments are wrongly held. And of course, those should be pushed back. Those ideas should be pushed back against.
So looking at some of the statistics on this, and so Washington Post article indicates that there's a rise of racist incidents that are on the rise, according to one study, and then also another, as you kind of alluded to, hate crimes are on the rise right now, according to FBI research. And what you rightly allude to is the fact that both the FBI as well as ADL with Anti-Defamation League have indicated that there's a rise of anti-Semitism over the past 3 years. Latest numbers indicate, I think last year it was 1,986 incidents of such crimes. And so I'm just trying to get a handle on this because I feel as though this should have been done a long time ago.
Right. And, you know, we grew up in a time where, fortunately, it's really negative and frowned upon to have these types of sentiments. I mean, it is, we grew up in a phase where you distance yourself from people who say those types of things, or you look down on them. And so in some ways, if you think of the big picture, one of my colleagues would say, you know, we've won on the big picture question because it's no longer publicly or socially acceptable to be racist. We lambaste those people. So that's a win. But the fact that hate crimes are on the rise, according to the FBI, who I would trust their statistics more than, you know, any news outlets, because you have to look at really what instances they're measuring and what really happened. We're really in an age of identity politics is on the rise, where we're highlighting our differences between one another, and we're, you know, associating closer with people who are in our realm and field. And I think that that division is really negative for our country, and we need to have a unifying force and even reach across the aisle. And I know racism is different than politics, but it's identity politics. It's still from those same root issues where we want to distance ourselves from those who are not like us.
So David, Chelsey brings up a great point relative to kind of the cleaning it on the outside in the public sphere, but also kind of have we allowed it to fester in private is one of the things that I'm interested in. And so we've got a Georgia mayor as well. So Atlantic Journal-Constitution reports that Mayor Teresa Kernley told city council she pulled the resume of an individual because, quote, because he is black and the city isn't ready for this. According to a council member, I'm going to quote at length because he really, I think he speaks something that's very painful, but also something that is very pertinent for our conversation. He says, quote, I'm a Christian and my Christian beliefs are you don't do interracial marriage. That's the way I was brought up and that's the way I believe, he said. Quote, I have black friends. I hired black people. When it comes to all this stuff you see on TV, when you see blacks and whites together, it makes my blood boil because that's just not the way a Christian is supposed to live. This quote isn't from 1940s. This quote is from yesterday. And so have we, in an effort to be able to clean the public sphere and the larger, broader public discourse, have we allowed racism to fester in the private and grow?
Man, that's it's an intense, question. But I would say that it can be even generational. Like, so the culture that you were brought up with, he was just saying, like, as a Christian, that's the way he was brought up, right? As a believer, that's just the way it is. But then you have to look at the biblical context, right? So where is that context coming from? Is that context coming from what man is saying, from what his family is saying? And don't get me wrong, nobody's perfect, but biblically, that is not sound. That's not loving, right? You know, God created.
Well, I mean,
man
they
in
would use the
general.
biblical concepts known as kinism, right? So kinism is the biblical concept that God would have us to be able to separate the races. This emerged in around 2004. Kinism would say that God separate the races in order to remain pure. And then obviously the biblical justification that's been used in the past relative to the degradation of African Americans has been the curse of Ham from Genesis 9. Has been utilized as well. But I'm really interested. Do you think that...
But we have to say that's not a Christian concept. We have to discredit those.
Those are fig leaves that are despicable and displeasing to God.
The gospel speaks to unification and
Galatians
loving.
3, 27, 28, all are equal and precious before the eyes of the Lord. Totally believe that. And so, but I'm really interested right now, is racism on the rise right now? That though we don't see it in the public eye, have we allowed it to be able to fester in the private? And one of the things that I want to press you on is the generational piece that you were talking about. Because I think it's one thing for us to be able to say, well, it's a different time back then. It's an individual, it was a long time ago, and he's just, unfortunately, he just is still clinging to certain beliefs that were a part of a bygone era. But then we continue to hear stories out of college campuses where this type of stuff is coming. I'm thinking about the University of Oklahoma as what happened just even last month. You think about what's happened at University of Alabama that would happen, about some of these individuals in these Greek life organizations that have that were spewing some of this racist hatred as well. And so I'd be interested to know, do you think it's on the rise, one? And then two, if it is, what accounts for this rise?
Yeah, I would definitely say the awareness of it is on the rise.
Okay.
More than ever, it's kind of like what Chelsey was saying, what classifies as an incident at this point. And the best thing that I could see with this is like that almost victim mentality. So anytime we have us versus them kind of mentality, like how is that, us being like, we don't want, I mean, the way I see this is like levels. So like almost like immigration, taking our jobs, things like that, right? What we were talking about the other days. But I would say that it is on the rise in the sense of just people are having that defense mechanism come out. And so the way they react a lot of times is not loving, but out of just like, I want to protect my own. Whatever I have, I want to protect that. Whatever seems like a threat, even if it's not, I don't want that to step into my life.
Okay.
Right. So, and I feel like that's a human reaction as well.
Okay, well, we got to take a break right now, but I'd be really interested to know your position on this as well. So do you think racism is on the rise right now in the U.S., or are these simply just outlier stories that don't broadly characterize the entirety of the population and the progress that we have made in the public sphere to be able to eradicate this? And so you can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212 or facebook.com/pointofviewradio. We'll be back right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined in studio by David Fraga and Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute. We have been talking about racism, and specifically there have been a number of incidents as of late, just specifically over the past 2 days, in which it appears as though there is a rise in racist incidents, but even more troubling than that, among Christians. And so we have been talking about that specifically to catch up. We have got two instances, both taking place, and one in Georgia among a small town mayor there, where she was caught with a proponent, supposed on an open mic, says that when she pulled the resume of a certain individual from a packet of 4 finalists because he is, quote, because he is black and the city isn't ready for this, which in turn spurred a city councilman to go on the record with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, rather, and he said, quote, I'm a Christian, and my Christian beliefs are you don't do interracial marriage. That's the way I was brought up, and that's the way I believe. I have black friends. I hire black people. But when it comes to all this stuff you see on TV, when you see blacks and whites together, it makes my blood boil, because that's just not the way a Christian is supposed to live. This incident is joined by an incident that happened in Tennessee yesterday, where an individual that we won't name, he was the Speaker of the House's chief of staff in the Tennessee State House, resigned due to cocaine usage in his office, as well as racist text messages that were found out on his phone, as well as through various social media platforms as well. And so that just raises the question for me that I'm asking right now. Is there a rise in racism here in the U.S.? Chelsey, you again, let's tease it back to you for a second.
Mm-hmm.
You brought up, I think, a pretty good distinction, whereas Jim Crow has been eradicated, where we're not seeing the public displays of racism like we once were years ago, but it seems as though it's festering underneath right now. And I wonder if it's simply just festering, or we've created an atmosphere where it might be fostering and growing underneath in the private circles and spheres of the U.S.
You know, it's a difficult question to answer because it's hard to know if these are isolated incidents. Is this a widespread sentiment? Are there entire communities that it's growing in? I don't know the answers to those questions. What I do know is we as a church are called to be the church.
Yeah.
And that this is a hearts and mind issue like all other issues. And so we are called as Christians to call that which is sin, sin, that there's no place for hate or animosity in our hearts towards brothers and sisters. And so, you know, we're called as a church to disciple on this issue. And I think it's difficult because there was actually a local church here called The Village that did a series on racism, which was a really great series. And I actually have never heard a church do that before. And I realized that it was such a surprise to me when they did that, and it was wonderful. They had a panel at the end so that congregants could ask questions, and it was like a very open environment to have the dialogue. And the truth is, that's something I should have seen in the church before. I mean, these are important social issues, just like any other. These are communities that we are supposed to be discipling and talking about these issues. And I think as a white individual, it's really intimidating to try to have a conversation about race. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to be insensitive. And I can admit that I've never had certain experiences that others have lived their entire lives with. And so it's intimidating, but we still need to have that dialogue and have those conversations in our communities.
And one of the fascinating things that, again, we didn't mention in this, or I didn't explicitly mention, but it was alluded to in this, is this isn't, you expect the world to act like the world. I expect the world to have certain hatred. I expect the world to be very selfish. I expect those things of broken people, just like I'm a broken person, but I'm pursuing after perfection, i.e. I'm pursuing after Jesus. And so there's a higher calling that God has beckoned those of us that are following after him to. And what's so frustrating and what's so disheartening and what's so maddening, I guess I would say, is there's biblical justification for these racist tendencies, is what we alluded to, David. You've got
there's
individuals.
Not biblical justification. They are misinterpreting things in the Bible.
But they are being discipled by individuals to be able to apply this and pass down these teachings and these doctrines, i.e. the curse of Ham, i.e., kinism, this idea of racial purity for the sake, and trying to twist it in an illogical fashion and in a fashion that does injustice to the biblical narrative. And so, David, I'm concerned about this, and I want to press the question again. What do you think? Do you think there is a rise in racism right now here in the U.S.? And if so, what's causing that rise?
That's such a deep, that's just a big question, right? Yeah. And just because it's easy to look at numbers, it's easy to try to have one group, try to defend, and we're the right group trying to say like there is a rise, or no, there's a group saying no, there isn't a rise, everyone's just overreacting. But the reality of it is that we see in news that rise, right? We see in our environments that there is a rise in some kind of awareness, at least. Social media, people are using it. They're saying, hey, this is targeting hate crime, this and that. But in what I see, I do see that there's at least more of an awareness of saying like, what is the one thing that this country is being divided by, right? For years, right? We see MLK, trying to make a movement, and then you see it get worse before it gets better. But what do you think that...
So what do you count the rise to then? If that's what you're perceiving right now, what do you count the rise to?
It could be just people coming into power and then someone pointing the blame at them.
Okay.
Right? It could be. I don't know. You see wars, like the World War II. You see a country saying, hey, we are the perfect country, people, race, or whatever it is, and we are our whole destiny. Our whole purpose is to conquer
your
this
argument is that there is an individual that gives cover to racists, and hence the reason why there's a rise.
I think people can justify where they come culturally from.
Okay. Thoughts on that, Chelsey? Do you think that there's a rise, one, and do you think that the rise is the contribution? The reason why there is a rise is because there is a leader, an individual that gives cover to those.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that there is a rise. The statistics, we have to base it back on statistics, right?
Yep,
so the statistics you cited earlier indicate to me there's a rise in hate crimes according to the FBI. We know there's a rise in anti-Semitism. Got that wrong.
Right.
And that's a problem for the exact reason you're saying, because we cannot dehumanize entire populations.
Yeah.
Right.
And so there is a need, I think, to be very, very outspoken, to take action. I'm not sure exactly what that looks like, but society as a whole needs to heal these issues so that they don't get out of hand and they don't get out of control, and we don't have what happened in World War II happening again to any population.
I know that's the interesting thing, though, because you would expect the church to be leading in this, right? You'd expect that.
I expect them to lead on a lot of fronts.
But then there's the reality. These are individuals that are following after Jesus that are the reason. Like you have the individual that did the anti-Semitic.
Well, they're false prophets. So
the anti-Semitic shoot. But I mean, so at the end of the day, though, they were taught something, and the teaching didn't catch, is what John would say, right, in 1 John 2. And so, like, the idea is like, and what happened in California 2 weeks ago is an individual that grew up in the church for all intents and purposes of what we know. And then he could commit these heinous crimes right now. You have an individual that apparently grew up his entire generation. This is what he taught he believed in Georgia right now. And to the extent that he holds this idea of kinism, of the idea that you can just separate the races and maintain that marital purity between the various races. And it makes his blood boil, is what he says, when it comes to interracial marriage. And then you have in Tennessee, this guy's younger than us. No, he's not younger than all of us. He's younger than most of us here at this table. And so this isn't just a generational thing. It appears, and I'm just trying to get a grip on. I'm trying to get an understanding of what accounts for either our awareness of the rise, what accounts for the rise. Because it just seems as though there is a rise.
Well, what do you think?
Yeah,
do you have a theory?
One, I think we don't know each other. I think we're completely individualized right now, and so it's really easy to hate that which you don't know. And so I think that there's that rise. Two, I think the internet has done something, is inculcating certain beliefs inside of us. I think you can point back to what happened in California relative to that. Him even saying that I've gone on the web to really be informed about what's happening. I think the web is fomenting this hate. It's inculcating these evil, demonic principles that are being put into play. And then 3, I just think that we're not speaking up. I don't think the church is speaking up on this particular issue, that we just have to be more forceful on this. And so I think those are 3 things. And we're going to tease that out because I'm not just saying these things. I've got numbers to be able to substantiate it because I know you love the numbers because I love the numbers. And you're going to be fascinated. I'm going to tell you, you're going to be shocked, you're going to be fascinated, and maybe you'll even find a little resonance. There was a new study that was put out that indicated how many friends that we have that don't look like us. And I think that in and of itself really reveals something about the American experiment. But we've got to go take a break right now. But when we come back from the break, more on this looming question right now of, is there a rise in racism here in the U.S.? And then 2, what is contributing to that rise? And we'd love to hear from you. You can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can jump over on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. This episode really begins back in May of 2017. That's when President Donald Trump, just 3 months into his presidency, walked to the Rose Garden of the White House and signed the executive order promoting free speech and religious liberty. That executive order commissioned a memo offering guidance to the executive branch by then Attorney General of the United States, Jeff Sessions. Several months later, the Department of Justice issued that guidance and about a year later held a summit on religious liberty at DOJ headquarters announcing the formation of a religious liberty task force. That task force provided on-the-ground guidance to executive agencies like the Department of Education, which now brings us to the point of this episode. Secretary Betsy DeVos recently sent a letter to Congress explaining that the Department of Education would no longer enforce a federal statute prohibiting religious organizations from providing educational services to students. DeVos noted that the decision by the Supreme Court of the United States in Trinity Lutheran v. Comer, as explained by the DOJ in former Attorney General Sessions' memo, requires federal law to permit religious organizations to participate at the same level as secular organizations. I agree with Secretary DeVos, who said, those seeking to provide high-quality educational services to students and teachers should not be discriminated against simply based on the religious character of their organization. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you have decided to join us on this kind of hot topic that we're talking about right now, relative to racism right now. Looking through the headlines, it appears as though racism is on the rise right now. Much has been given to the anti-Semitic remarks and anti-Semitic actions that are being perpetuated by certain individuals, whether it was the synagogue that was shot up in Pittsburgh or the synagogue that was shot up just 2 weeks ago in California to now what we're continuing to see is what the remarks that were made by this individual, by two individuals in this Georgia city that's right outside of Atlanta, or the chief of staff for the Tennessee State Speaker of the House, just resigned yesterday over news of cocaine usage in his legislative office, as well as his racist remarks via text messages as well as social media. And so the question I have been pressing is trying to figure out, is racism on the rise? Again, I know I continue to be the broken record, but I think Chelsey made a really great distinction here, as in from the public discourse, it seems to have been wiped away. We're cleaning that out.
Well, no, that's not what I said was, let me say, because this is important. So I'll speak for myself. But what I said was, we have learned a lot from our horrible history in 150 years, and we can all agree on that. There's not necessarily an institutionalized, systemic, legally instituted racism in our country. And because of that, we can say we've come leaps and bounds. And I also think we've come leaps and bounds in the sense that it's socially stigmatized to be racist publicly. So if in my circles or growing up, if someone was an overt racist, they were stigmatized, isolated, and it was not just frowned upon, but it's not socially acceptable. So that's a win compared to maybe even 20, 30 years ago.
Completely agree.
But racism still exists. And so I don't know if we're asking the right question, because you keep asking, is it on the rise? Is it on the rise? And I think, well, maybe the problem is it's still around. It's still existing, and it has to be eradicated. And we have to figure out ways as a church and as a community and as a society to continue to push forward to eradicate even, the smallest spaces of racism. It's a hearts and mind issue. So I found some statistics. Can we go there?
Oh, we're totally going there. It's like my love language.
Okay, I found statistics because it's really hard for me. And of course, I don't know how they measured all of this stuff, so just bear with me. But it's the Pew Research Center, which I find very, very credible, that talked about just a few of the differences between, this is going to compare Black and white populations, but the wealth gap between Black and white populations decreased among lower income families, but has actually increased among middle income families over the last, let's say, 6 years. So that issue is a problem, but there's also a wide partisan gap in views of racism as quote unquote a big problem growing even wider. So back in 2009, so 10 years ago, only 30% of Democrats and 40% of Blacks thought that racial divides were a big problem. Only 18% and 20% of Republicans and white populations thought it was a problem. But now both of those numbers have increased. So currently, 10 years moving forward, 76% of Democrats and 80% of Black people think that racism is a big problem. And an increase to double, 40% and 52% of Republicans and white populations think that racism is a big problem. So if it is on the rise, it is noted by all parties, by all accounts.
So you
that
bring
it's
up
becoming a growing problem.
You bring up a great. There's something there because again, both of us are keenly aware of being Republicans, being conservatives. We're often categorized as racist, right? Because the leader of the Republican Party is an individual named President Donald Trump. I don't know if our listeners have heard of him. I think maybe he's been in the news a time or two. And one of the kind of the remarks or the quips that's often associated with President Trump is that he just is a racist. There are individuals that are adamantly convinced that President Trump is a racist. So do you think politics has a role to play in this kind of this, what appears to be, we're increasingly becoming aware of just the racism that is so prevalent around us right now?
I'm not sure about the political question, because we have to remember the experiences that individuals are having are accumulative throughout their life. And so in one study, 40% of Black individuals and 26% of Hispanics said that they have been treated unfairly in a store or restaurant based on their race. And only 7% of whites have believed the same. And so to me, that's not a political question or a current events question. That's over the course of your whole life, 50% of an entire population is saying they're treated unfairly. that's a problem to me. I think that what we're seeing now is identity politics have increased maybe the conversations.
Okay.
And I think those are people are coming out of the woodwork with more identity politics than ever. And you name the identity. I mean, it doesn't matter race or otherwise, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender. Identity politics is just at an all-time high in my lifetime, I think. And so maybe that accounts for the discussions we're having.
Because I think you bring up a really great point. There are certain conversations that are profitable to be able to have in the public square, and there are certain conversations that would probably be better in a smaller setting. Is how the delineation I would make with it. And it seems right now, you alluded to it a couple of segments ago, and tell me if I'm wrong on this. It's important to be able to have these sensitive conversations because it's really hard to have these conversations. And it seems as though the only place that we're having these conversations is in public, and in public it's really hard for us to, what's called in social science, de-individuate someone. Hence the reason why most of us drive atrociously. Well, the reason why we can drive atrociously towards individual and just be awful drivers on the road is because it's really easy for us to other the other person because we're not necessarily in human contact with them. You would never walk down a grocery store aisle the way that you drive down 75, right? Like you just don't cut up in front of people.
But it's a conversation for a different day.
And so, but here's one of the things that I think is just so prevalent right now is that we just largely don't know one another. That's why it's so easy for us to lob these bombs at the other side. So a study.
Go ahead.
So a study I found, which is fascinating. So the average white American, according to one study, indicated that they have 91 white friends out of every 100 friends. So 91% of their friends being individuals that you would associate with at least once a month, 91% are white. And from an African American standpoint, the average African American, 83% of their friends are of the same ethnicity. And it just seems as though, especially when I consider the biblical narrative and like the manifold wisdom of God being displayed, it says in Ephesians 3:8, this reality that it's really hard for us to testify. It's really hard for us to demonstrate the unity of God from an ethnic standpoint when we're so homogeneous right now. And it seems that, and to tie onto that, it's really easy for us to demonize and to other the person when we don't know that person, which is what one of the kind of couple of things that continue to percolate in my mind when I think about racism right now. And I'm less prone to be able to say that these are outlier situations that are happening in Georgia, in Tennessee, in California right now. And this isn't a left or right issue. This is a us issue. That when we're differentiating one another, and then two, we're offering up these hateful words at each other. It's just, it's unhealthy, and it will not end well, as from what it seems to be. So we've got to go to a break right now. But when we come back from the break, we're going to continue this racism conversation. But also, we've got some other news that we'll be talking about as well. Specifically, we'll be thinking through the legacy of Rachel Held Evans. Tragically, she lost her life earlier over the weekend at the young age of 37. And so we'll be talking a little bit about her, but we got to go to a break. But when we come back, more Point of View.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30,
Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, here for the second hour of Point of View, your Millennial Roundtable. That's happening on a Tuesday. Yes, my friends, it's happening on a Tuesday. We have finally made the move, moving on up in the week. That's right. No, is that kind of corny? Was that kind of bad? Did you hear that? Did you hear me say like moving on up, or should I have sung it a little bit more?
You should have sung it a little bit more.
But unfortunately, if I start singing, then it will. I found that audience will immediately turn the channel or roll the dial or whatever you do now. Do you roll dials anymore in cars, or just
button you press?
The buttons?
No.
Yeah. Okay.
Or say, hey Siri these days.
Well, nevertheless, welcome to the Millennial Roundtable, this Tuesday edition, starting off now. From now until Kingdom Come, we will be on Tuesdays now, and so grateful that you have decided to join us. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined here at the Millennial Roundtable with David Fraga, as well as Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute. And for those of you that are just joining us, welcome. But for those of you, we have been making our way into the second hour. And so quick recap, during the first hour, we talked a little bit about the fact that it's National Teachers Day. Mm-hmm. So congratulations to sorry about this. If you were in studio or you were watching online, you saw a little bit of what I saw, and it was just glorious. So it's National Teachers Day. So we want to say thank you so much to the teachers out there. We're so grateful for you all and the sacrifices you make day in and day out. We recognize you're coming in on the end of a semester, and so please continue strongly and know that we are grateful for you, because I am keenly aware that teaching Nick was the pits. No. If we had sound effects, that would have been a killer line. We could have had like a laugh track just then. But what we talked about during the first hour was racism. Is racism on the rise here in the U.S.? And we're going to talk about that a little bit now. And so just to give you a recap of the two stories that kind of have been spurring our conversation. So specifically, they're happening in three instances, one might be able to say. One, the first instance that gave rise to this is that a community outside of Atlanta in Georgia, recently there was reports that indicated that that the mayor allegedly pulled a resume from a position that she was holding because of what she said, quote, according to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, he is black and the city isn't ready for this. When the Atlanta Journal-Constitution continued on, they interviewed one of the councilmen, and one of the councilmen at length, and I'm going to quote him at length because I think it bears repeating. He says, quote, I'm a Christian, and my Christian beliefs are you do not interracial, you don't do interracial marriage. That's the way I was brought up, and that's the way I believe. I have black friends. I hire black people. But when it comes to all this stuff you see on TV, when you see blacks and whites together, it makes my blood boil, because that's just not the way a Christian is supposed to live. Now, in and of itself, that is an atrocious statement and an atrocious sentiment, especially coming from a Christian. But unfortunately, we have continued to see more and more of this. Just north of Georgia, in the state of Tennessee, we have an individual that was the chief of staff for the Speaker of the House. He resigned yesterday because of, one, usage of cocaine in his office, and then two, racist comments and statements that were found on with his text messages, as well as on some social media platforms as well. And then if we stretch back 2 weeks ago, what what we continue to see is that in California, at the synagogue shooting that happened on the last day of Passover, there was an individual that grew up in a Christian home. His dad was an elder at the local Presbyterian church, shot up that synagogue that ended up killing 2 people and injuring 4 people. And that has raised the question that we have been asking is, are we seeing a rise in racism here in the U.S.? And so, and if so, why? But I think one of the things that we really want to hone in on, especially since this is point of view, is that these are all instances where individuals are utilizing the biblical narrative to justify their racist tendencies. And it's very troubling, to say the least. And we've been trying to figure out over the past hour, one, answering the question of, is it on the rise here in the U.S.? And 2, what is contributing if it is on the rise? And so we'd love to hear from you. You can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can jump over on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And Chelsey, I think you brought up a really great point, and I'd love for you just to share a little bit more, tease it out a little bit, is regardless of whether it's on the rise or not, it seems to be all around us right now. And this is not the way things are supposed to be.
Right. One of the points I made earlier is I don't know if the right question is it on the rise or does it still exist? Mm-hmm. Because I think the fact that it still exists means we still have work to do, mm-hmm. right? And we need to continue to push as a society, as a culture, and as Christians, most importantly, to eradicate these types of hateful sentiments from society. I pulled some statistics from the Pew Research Center, and in the last 10 years, both Democrats and Republicans and black and white groups were polled, and both cited racism as a big problem. The amount who agree with that statement has doubled in 10 years. Wow. So on both sides. Now, of course, Democrats and black individuals agree more. 80% of them think that it's a big issue, as opposed to about 50% of Republicans and white individuals think it's a big issue. But the number, both sides of the aisle and in many groups, all can agree that it's an issue more than it was maybe 10 years ago. I don't know what accounts for that. I don't know why it's on the rise, but I do know that it's still a problem, and it's really the church's job to be the church on this issue. And I said this the last hour as well, but one of the churches here locally had an entire series dedicated to racial division in our community, and they had panelists. It was an open conversation where the church members were able to ask hard questions and try to seek to understand. And I really liked how they presented it, because they said, no one is having this conversation because it's an intimidating one to have. Yeah. No one wants to say the wrong thing or accidentally offend or, be put in a position where they don't know how to have this conversation well, but we have to have the conversation. And I wish more churches were doing that. I wish that wasn't the first time I'd ever heard race talked about from the pulpit.
Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting things that's happening right now, is that these conversations are so sensitive and they can be so hurtful because, one, they're bringing up things of the past, but also less than desirable situations in the present. And it's really important to be able to hold these conversations, but to host these conversations in a way that individuals can, one, extend forgiveness where forgiveness needs to be extended, and 2, understand in gracious manner what's being communicated as well. And where I can tell you more often than not is the most ungracious place to be able to host these conversations is in the public square. Like when you're leveling these accusations and when you're trying to have these sensitive conversations in a large platform, it just is very unconducive, and it ends up it rarely goes well. And so what I want to know from you all right now, and you can call in, do you think racism here in the U.S. is on the rise? And if you think it is, then why is it on the rise? Well, you can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can go over to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. We're going to continue talking about racism here in the U.S. If you think it's on the rise, or if you think these are just a couple of outlier situations and circumstances. But we've got to take a break. But when we come back from the break, more from Point of View.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
The Supreme Court justices may be forgiven for having a feeling of deja vu. For the third time, the justices had to deal with a case in which the president was given power by Congress and then challenged because he used that power. First, it was the travel ban. Then it was the president's national emergency declaration in order to build the wall. Finally, it were the oral arguments about whether a citizenship question should be put in the 2020 census. All three of these cases have a number of things in common. The Constitution grants certain powers to Congress. Congress delegates those powers to the president. Then President Trump uses those powers in a way that Democrats don't like, and a federal court case ensues. You probably have already thought of a solution to this ongoing problem. Congress should stop delegating their power to the president. I'll deal with that topic in my next commentary, but you might wonder why Congress keeps doing this. Here's a secret that few political commentators mention. When the leader of your party is in power, you don't have a problem when he uses that power. But as soon as someone of the other party, especially if it's Donald Trump, gets into power, you go crazy. This case before the Supreme Court should be fairly simple. Congress delegated to the Secretary of Commerce the power to determine the form and content of the census. You may not like what he decided, but that's what the law stipulated decades ago. David Fraga, in a recent commentary, says here is where we see the biggest contrast between progressive and conservative approaches to jurisprudence. The liberal progressive sees the problem and demands the court fix the problem. The conservative looks at the same pattern and says, if you don't like the law, change it. Congress has had numerous opportunities to change the law and did not. Therefore, I predict that at least 5 conservative justices on the court will rule in favor of the Trump administration. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you've decided to join us today. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute, as well as David Fraga. We have been talking about racism here in the U.S., and it appears as though it is on the rise right now. Just if you take a cursory glance at the headlines right now, everywhere from California to Tennessee, all the way down to Georgia, there are instances whereby there are individuals that have either said things or done things that are racist in nature, and that not only have hurt individuals, but also some individuals have lost their lives because of these tendencies. And I think one of the more troubling things, especially from a Christian perspective, is the reality that many of these were perpetuated by individuals that claim to be following after Jesus. Even though we know it to be true that what Jesus has said, that there is neither Greek nor Jew, woman nor man, slave nor free, all are in Christ Jesus our Lord. Our God is one that is not racist in nature, that they are all precious in his sight, red and yellow, black and white. And for the racists, heaven is going to seem like hell, because there are going to be individuals from every tribe, tongue, and nation gathered together to worship our resurrected King. But it appears as though there have been instances whereby certain individuals have twisted the biblical narrative to justify their racist flesh. And we can think about 2 instances in particular. One, the curse of Ham, that individuals are utilizing Genesis 9 to be able to, or misapplying or misinterpreting Genesis 9 to be able to perpetuate this denigration of the races. And then recently, in 2004, there is an idea known as kinism that has begun to be on the rise as well. And kinism has the idea that God specifically ordained races and that he intends for us to preserve that division to one degree or another. And so we have raised the question to you all, and a couple of you have decided to phone in right now about whether you think racism is on the rise here in the U.S. And if so, what accounts for that rise? So you can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Let's go ahead and jump over on the phone line, shall we? And so let's make our way over to Indiana right now. We've got Larry in Indiana. Larry, you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you for taking my call.
Hey, Larry.
I personally believe that racism has continued to exist. Mm-hmm. It lingers. I'm a retired Air Force. I remember going into the Air Force and going through at that time. That was the early 70s, 72, 73. And we all, no matter what base you went to, you had to go through something called race relations class. And then later on, they changed it to human relations class. But and that continued right up through 94 when I retired. But I think that we're missing the mark here in that we talk about racism, and all too often we take a look, and I'm not picking sides here whatsoever. I think the only race is the human race. But and then you'll remember that they used to talk about reverse discrimination and reverse racism. Mm-hmm. Racism is racism.
Yeah.
And when I say we're missing the mark here, we're talking all too often, I believe, about just black or white against black discrimination and racism, which exists, mm-hmm. but it exists from the other in reverse as well.
Mm-hmm.
Not to use that term, reverse discrimination, but racism is racism, and I think over the last 10 years, you said that some perceive that is risen. I think that has been a product of politics as well, and promoting certain individuals as the victims. And I think it's basically, if you remember the term helter-skelter, I think over the last 10 years it's been promoted, and I call it political helter-skelter. They're using it to turn one group of people against another.
Yeah, I think, Larry, you bring up a great point relative to this isn't if we look all throughout human history as well as all throughout the world, racism isn't just dominated by one particular race. There's been instances and individuals that have been of a variety of different ethnicities that have utilized, that have been racist in nature. And not only have they been racist, but they've denigrated others that are different than them. And I think that's one of the more disturbing trends, because I think it's really easy to denigrate and it's really easy to degrade individuals that you do not know. Research is very clear that we're less likely to hate one another. We're less likely to really to denigrate someone if we know that other person. That's what makes the internet can be such a good thing, but it also can be such a detrimental thing because we don't know the person on the other side. When we cited a study earlier that according to one study, that the average white American has 91 white friends out of 100. So there's a 91% of the friends that surround this a white person are of the same ethnicity. Relative to African Americans, that number is 83%. And so we largely don't know the experience of someone else that is of a different ethnicity from us, because we're not hanging out with them. We're not associating with them. We're not going to dinner with them. We're not having them over for dinner as well. And so, again, the question continues to be said, is racism on the rise in the U.S.? And if so, why? And so we're going to continue taking your phone calls. We're going to jump on over to South Carolina right now. We've got Virgil in South Carolina. Virgil, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, Nick. Glad to hear you guys on this beautiful Tuesday, man. I really appreciate what you just said, and I value highly what Chelsey mentioned concerning it's always been here. I agree with her on that. I think just through the media, I think it has a greater avenue in which to express itself now. I feel that the reason why it is the way it is because, like you just mentioned, just a lack of communication, a lack of getting to know one another, and building those relationships. I've experienced it a lot. You experienced it even within the church. I think the comment made concerning being a believer and feeling that race, that type of prejudice is justified. I think that's foolish. I think we, of all people, should be able to break that barrier, understanding that there is, we are all one in Jesus Christ. So I highly respect what you guys are saying today. This has been something that has been a passion of mine for many years. I go to a predominantly white church, and being that my pastor is white, I highly respect that brother, man. He's the one that led me to faith in Christ. And I told him when I became a believer that one of my goals was to learn the scriptures from him, that I may be able to go back and teach my people what the scriptures say concerning who Jesus Christ is. And by God's grace, I've been able to do that. Are we a perfect church? Absolutely not. We have faults. And like I said before, I've experienced some of this as well. But knowing who I am in Jesus Christ, it really gives me a different perspective as to how I relate to those who I deem to be sort of racist towards me. And it allows me to pray for them and to love them and to figure out ways in which we can engage one another. And you can get to know me, not by who I am on the outside, or like Paul said, we know Christ not from the flesh. We used to at one point, but now we don't know him like that anymore. We know him in a different way now, having come to faith in Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I appreciate so much about you, Virgil, is kind of what you're alluding to. It's this reality of what the church can be. One, we're founding our identity based on Jesus, but one of the things that I'm a little worried about, but there is some growth. I think about individuals like Derwin Gray, about Brian Laritz. These are individuals that are really pushing so that the church might display the manifold, the multicolored wisdom of God to the rulers and authorities in the air, is what it says, or rules and authorities on the ground, rather, from Ephesians 3:8. One of the kind of discouraging, I'll say, statistics that I'm keenly aware of is the reality that 90% rather of churches here in the U.S. are homogeneous in nature. And so 90% are homogeneous, being that there's one ethnicity that's predominant. And so what is homogeneous according to the research? Homogeneous would be a church that is comprised of one ethnicity. 80% of it is comprised of one ethnicity. So you think about 90% of the churches right now here in the U.S. are comprised of, are very homogeneous, where 80% of their worship attendance is individuals that are of the same race. I think there's arguments that can be made for that. I think there's arguments that could be made against that. But what I do know at the end of the day and at the end of days is that we are going to come before a resurrected king, and it is going to be not be homogeneous in nature. It's going to be very heterogeneous, and it's going to be very glorious, because there's going to be there's going to be individuals from every tribe, tongue, and nation that will bow the knee and confess that Jesus is Lord. And so for the racist, heaven will be like hell. But the glorious news is that our God has come to make all things new. But we've got to take a break right now. But when we come back from the break, I'm really excited to introduce you to someone. We've got an individual that will be with us in studio. His name is Stephen Savage. Stephen has got a new album that's coming out entitled Woven, and I can't wait to tell you about this great work that he's doing and share with you more about that right after this.
It's amazing but true. When it comes to one of America's biggest household expenditures, healthcare, a lot of people think they've got no choice. People are used to thinking we have to do it this way, but they don't. Yes, you have the freedom to choose an alternative with your healthcare. It's MediShare, and it costs way less than the alternatives. The typical family saves $500 a month, not a year, a month. And if you're single, this can save you a lot too. And let's face it, a big reason MediShare is 400,000 people strong, it just works. They've shared over $3 billion in medical bills, so they can help share your needs too. Joining MediShare for so many people is one of those things that makes you say, why didn't I do this before? So yes, the time has come for something better. Look into joining MediShare and see why so many people are opting out of the old way and into the new. Why not look into this? Just call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you've decided to join us today. And now we have an in-studio guest with us today. We've got Stephen Savage. He's releasing his new album here in a couple of days. The new album is called Woven. Stephen is a local Christian hip-hop artist located in Dallas, Texas. Student at, I think, one of the greatest schools in the history of the world, Dallas Baptist University. He's been making music for a little over 3 years now. Stephen has music available on Spotify, Apple Music, and any other source where you can stream music. His album Woven is set to release on May 10th, which is just 3 days from now, and features a local artist, Jamal Clark, as well as Oklahoma indie legend Dylan Chase. Stephen, how are you, man?
Doing good, man. How are you?
So good, so good. So grateful that you're finally here. So for our listeners, there's a little bit of background on this. Stephen has endured great pain. Specifically, he has had to endure my company for 8 days in Boston Massachusetts. I first met Stephen at Dallas Baptist. He took a class that I was teaching up in Boston, one of those kind of extended, kind of a long, a fall break class for all intents and purposes. And I got to know Stephen during that time, and got to know that Stephen is just this brilliant artist, talented, has a quick wit, and is just a man after God's own heart. And so, Stephen, tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I am from Little Elm, Texas, which is like right by Frisco, in between like Frisco and Denton. Grew up there, and grew up in the church as well. Thankful for parents that did good on that. I think they're actually listening right now too.
Are they really? Okay.
I'm going to do like the typical,
tell your
like,
mom,
hey mom, hey
tell
dad.
your mom, come on, there you go.
Hey, your kid's doing it. And so just grew up in the church. At the end of high school, felt like God was leading me to the Holy Hill at Dallas Baptist, and been there since. Currently interning with the Southern Baptist of Texas Convention. Doing some evangelism interning work over there, and I've been making music for about 3 years now.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about that. Where did music come in? Was music always just a part of your life? One, and then two, what appealed to you? What made the turn specifically when you're in the music stream? What appealed to you about hip hop?
Yeah, so I was actually like a band nerd in junior high.
Okay, what instrument you play?
I played tuba.
Oh,
so
wow, okay, tuba guy,
the big guy playing tuba. Like that's the perfect stereotype. And so, just played tuba in band, and so I loved music, was always around music, and then I always loved listening to rap too. Like I've always just been a fan of rap, and just listening to people, how they can like flip words and stuff. It's pretty cool. And towards like the senior year of high school, there were some people at our school who started like rapping as well, and I was like, man, like, I'm going to try it. And so I tried it, and my first song was absolutely terrible. And it was so bad, dude. Like, it was terrible. And so after that, I was like, man, I was starting to realize that the reason why it was, like, pretty bad was because I was, like, trying to, like, flex how cool I am, but then also, like, but Jesus is cooler. And so I was like, man, I need to, like, either go one way or another on this one. And so I was like, man, I'm just going to talk about God more. And so started doing that. I would say that, like, the transition to like start actually making music was just because started off by wanting to like have fun and do some cool things, and it turned into just a form of like worship too.
Really?
So I think that worship doesn't just have to be with like a 6-string guitar and singing, but it can be just behind some 808s, a snare, and just spitting some stuff.
So help us understand that. Like I'd be interested like the influences in your life, because I think when a lot of us, when we think about hip hop, we don't think about the Christian hip hop.
Right.
We largely think, well, that's talking about cars, that's talking about money. There's just these stereotypes that are often associated with hip hop music. But you're saying that there's a different type. Specifically there's a redemptive quality to hip hop music, and not only is there a redemptive quality, but you have found it and that you are a part of it. So help us understand that.
Right. So this whole like concept of like rap only being bad stuff, like kind of suggests that God doesn't have control over that.
Oh,
right.
Yeah. Good point.
And so it's like, if God is in control and he's sovereign over everything, then surely everything can be redeemed.
Yeah.
And so instead of just talking about money, cars, women, whatever you want to talk about, you can talk about Jesus and, our stories. And that's really what rap kind of is, just telling a story over like a beat and just talking about a certain topic. And so you choose what that topic is. If you talk about Jesus, then that's like a redeemed form of like what most people would consider to be the devil's music or whatever.
Okay, so tell us, how did it begin? How did your rap career begin? Were there certain individuals that came into your life?
Right.
Was there a group that you found out about and that included you? Help us understand.
So man, I first started listening to like Andy Mineo and Lecrae in high school, two other Christian rappers, and I was like, man, that's cool. And then I was like, I'm going to start doing rap. And so I was like, might as well just do what they do. And so I just started making some Christian rap. And then for some huge influences, those didn't really come until about DBU for Christian rap. And so one guy, Jamal Clark, he's a Dallas guy. He formed this group called I Am Too Talented, talking about the like the parable of the talents. And so like the 2 talented didn't have as much as the 5 talented person, but he uses 2 talents to go and serve. And so kind of like based on that idea. And he has been mentoring me for the last couple of years, like pretty heavily, and not just music, but life as well. And then also a guy named Dylan Chase is from Oklahoma. And he's like, this dude is like a legend that not a lot of people know about.
Yeah.
But that's because he's just really humble and doesn't talk about it. But he's also been mentoring me to a little bit more like hands off just because there's a whole state's difference.
Yeah.
But anytime we get together, man, it's always like life-giving conversations and mentoring. And so that's how I would say that like the biggest influences are, and kind of how I got started. They kind of just like grabbed me and just dragged me to like, hey, this is how you do things better. This is how like you pick better beat selection, write better verses, conceptualize songs.
And that's, I mean, that's just, that sounds, especially if I'm a listener right now, I'm thinking that sounds just like any other industry. Like we all can get better. One, we all identify the talents that God has put inside of us. And two, we all try to find a Christian. We try to find that man of peace, that woman of peace, to be able to help disciple us in order that we might be able to pursue after excellence so that we could extend his kingdom, and that hopefully it would move towards the good of the world, regardless of whatever industry that you're in.
Sure, yeah.
So help us. So is this your first album that you've released?
Yeah, so this is my first full-length album. I made an EP last year.
Okay.
And if you want to listen to it, need to quick because I'm about to take it down because it's just quite frankly not that good.
Okay.
And so, but yeah, for full-length albums, this is going to be my first one.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about the process in this. Like, what is there themes that are woven throughout this? See how I did there?
Nice.
You guys
smooth.
see what can I say?
Yeah.
It's not my first rodeo. Okay, go ahead. Tell us a little bit about this first album.
Yeah, so it's called Woven, of course, and basically what it talks about is understanding just like how broken we are, because I think for a long part of my life I didn't think I was that broken. Like, of course, like, oh yes, I need Jesus, but then part of me was like, well, like I think I kind of got it together. And then this year God has been gracious, and also like kind of a pruning season of just like, hey, this is like how broken you are, and just kind of like peeling back layers to that. And so seeing a lot of hurt, seeing a lot of like personally like guilt and shame, things that I struggle with pretty heavily, and then just saying this is where the gospel meets you in that. And so that's kind of what the main theme of this album is. It's like understanding what parts of us are broken and what parts are just not like super pretty, and then understanding how Jesus weaves us with something better. So where when you see me and you see my life, yes, you see those like rough things, but you can also see the gospel flowing through it and kind of redeeming that situation. And so yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, so is your thing? There's 10 tracks on the album. 11 tracks on the album. Is it so? It's coming out. It's coming out May 10th. So tell when it comes out May 10th, because you're going to get this flood of people that are going to buy it, and they've got to choose. They got to choose one of the 11 tracks. Is there one in particular that you're just like, man, that was just my heart and soul is in that one?
Yeah, man, I would say there's 2 tracks that are like that. One track is called Purpose. And basically what that track talks about is like, what is my purpose in life?
Mm-hmm.
What is like God created me for? How do I find purpose? Like, if I'm going through a tough season, does that mean that I just don't have any purpose anymore? Should just give up?
Yeah.
Obviously the answer is no to that.
Yeah.
But it just kind of just hits home for me personally.
Yeah.
Like objectively, it's probably not the best song on the album, but it means a lot to me. And then track 10 is actually called Woven.
Okay.
And that track was really hard for me to write. Like it took a couple weeks for me to actually get through writing the whole thing.
Okay.
Because I didn't want to have to talk about what I talk about on it. So basically I just go through my testimony in my life and just get pretty open about like, man, this is like a lot of things I struggle with.
And so we're gonna have to take a break, and then we're gonna come back and we're gonna talk a little bit more about Woven. We're gonna give them a tease, right? So we're gonna give them a tease,
of course.
And so when you come back from the break, we're gonna continue talking with Stephen Savage, and we're gonna talk specifically about this song Woven. But it's a part of the larger album that is called Woven as well, and that's gonna be available on May 10th. To find out more information on Stephen, you can go to our website, pointofview.net, or make sure that you're pre-ordering his album that will again release on May 10th. You can pre-order it now. So at midnight when it comes out, while you're sleeping at night and dreaming, you can continue the dream and be a daydreamer listening to the album on May 10th all throughout the day. But we've got to go to a break right now. But when we come back from the break, more with Stephen Savage, and also we'll continue to have Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute and David Fraga here. But we've got to go to break. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. This episode really begins back in May of 2017. That's when President Donald Trump, just 3 months into his presidency, walked to the Rose Garden of the White House and signed the executive order promoting free speech and religious liberty. That executive order commissioned a memo offering guidance to the executive branch by then Attorney General of the United States, Jeff Sessions. Several months later, the Department of Justice issued that guidance and about a year later held a summit on religious liberty at DOJ headquarters announcing the formation of a religious liberty task force. That task force provided on-the-ground guidance to executive agencies like the Department of Education, which now brings us to the point of this episode. Secretary Betsy DeVos recently sent a letter to Congress explaining that the Department of Education would no longer enforce a federal statute prohibiting religious organizations from providing educational services to students. DeVos noted that the decision by the Supreme Court of the United States in Trinity Lutheran versus Comer, as explained by the DOJ in former Attorney General Sessions' memo, requires federal law to permit religious organizations to participate at the same level as secular organizations. I agree with Secretary DeVos, who said, those seeking to provide high-quality educational services to students and teachers should not be discriminated against simply based on the religious character of their organization. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View. We are joined in studio by the artist that has that song. That's Stephen Savage, and recently going to be coming out with his album that's going to be dropping on May 10th. And so you're going to want to be able to check that out, and you can make sure to pre-order that album on our website at www.pointofview.net. You'll see Stephen's picture there on the website in the show notes today, and be sure to click on that, and you'll be able to go pre-order that. Again, that's releasing on May 10th. Again, have in studio with us Stephen Savage, who is this phenomenal artist, better person, just a great guy. And so exceedingly grateful for his friendship, and got a chance to meet him on a study trip here at Dallas Baptist University when we took a little trip up to Boston, and also joined in studio by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute, as well as David Fraga. And so, Stephen, right before the break, you were telling us about the track on this album. There's 11 tracks on it. There's one track in particular that was really hard for you to write. And so tell us a little bit about Woven. What are you communicating in it?
Yeah, so in the track Woven is pretty much me accepting the fact that I'm not as great as I've always believed that I thought I was, you know? And so like the opening lines is, I've got no weight to my name, bury me into my grave, overwhelmed by the weight of guilt and shame, Jesus, is it true that you save? And so I ask a lot of like hard questions in that album particularly, and so this is one of the last songs to kind of wrap up the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for a lot of my life, I've been kind of scared to ask these questions because I'm not afraid of like what I might hear, but afraid of what I might not hear, right? And so like I try to just act like super pride and super strong, like, you know what, even if regardless of what might happen, I'm good enough to kind of take this through. And just got really just broken and just talked about like past problems with pride and shame and guilt, and how I talk about how I'm about one thing and then I'm about another thing, and just kind of accepting that and then confessing that to everyone who is going to listen to it.
That's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. And again, Stephen, his new album is dropping on May 10th, and you can find out more information on Stephen as well as on this album. We want to encourage you to be able to go pick up this album. You can do so online, as well as you can pre-order it through, if you're a digital music person, on Spotify as well as on Apple Music. And so you're going to want to download that now. You can pre-order it. And because there's also, for our listeners that are interested right now, you've also got a single that's out on the album, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so
yes.
it's At the Bottom?
At the Bottom.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about it, At the Bottom.
Yeah, so At the Bottom pretty much just talks about how like all the people that are at the top, get like a lot of shine, and being someone who is at the bottom, it kind of gets a little bit hard to fight comparison.
Yeah.
And like, man, I wish I could be up there, but understanding that, what, God has me here for a reason. And so instead of wishing that I was somewhere else, appreciate where God has me and using that for where to do ministry at. And so it features a guy named Dylan Chase. Talked about him before the break a little bit. He is just an awesome guy, delivers a really just great verse. And he's someone who personally I would consider to be towards the top. Yeah. And so you kind of get like both perspectives at it. And so, so May 10th also, he's coming to Dallas at the Prophet Bar in Deep Ellum.
Okay.
And I'm opening for him there too.
Phenomenal.
And so, that'll be fun.
Okay, so you're talking about At the Bottom, and I think this is a great segue. So you've been doing rap for Christian hip hop for how long now?
About 3 years.
Okay, so you've 3 years. Has there been difficulty as you've been trying to make it in the Christian hip hop world? Has there been lessons that you've learned? Share a little bit about your story with that. Is it a little bit harder than what you anticipated? Help us understand.
Yeah, it's been a lot of just hard time and just a lot of like more difficulty than I thought there was.
Yeah.
Not that I thought I was going to like rise up instantly, but when I first started, I didn't even know how serious I was about it, right?
Yeah.
Like I was just kind of starting off just having fun. And then understanding that, hey, God might be opening like legitimate doors here. So let's walk through those. And like since then, it's been there's been a lot of great moments, a lot of sweet times, and getting to meet a lot of like cool people who I've looked up to for a while, and getting to like have community with them and getting to talk with them. But then there's also been just a lot of honestly just like comparison and just like, man, that guy makes like really good music that's a lot better than mine. And like I don't know if I'll ever get to that point.
Yeah.
And so having to learn through that process that there's no need for comparison, and that there's no need to feel shame or guilt in that, but just like accept that, hey, where I'm at's where I'm at, and we're going to grow, we're going to get better, but it's take some time.
Are you excited about where the hip hop industry is going, the Christian hip hop industry? Because I think for, again, like it's still, in the large degree, it's still relatively new industry. I think a lot of our listeners would be keenly aware that when they associate hip hop, the last thing they think about is Christian, but I mean, just individuals that have gone before you. So the Lecrae's, the Andy Meninos, there's just a number of individuals. Is it 116?
116.
Yeah, 116 was a group that was just really did pioneering work in the Christian hip hop world, and now are you excited about where the industry's going? Do you think that there's the opportunity to be a witness for Christ in the larger musical industry? Does that excite you? Is that like burbling up?
It's super exciting for me personally, because I understand that like not everyone is going to go inside of a church.
Yeah.
Right. And so to be able to bring the church to them in some respect, like through music and through like an avenue that they're already familiar with, because a lot of people like know of rap music at least, but to be able to bring the gospel to them through that, it's kind of like if I had to put myself in the shoes of those people, it's kind of like when you put like a pill into like some peanut butter for your dog to eat, and it's like, oh man, look at this, and then it's like, oh wait, why is there medicine in here? It's kind of like the same with Christian rap. It's like, oh man, this sounds cool. Wait, he's talking about God. Wait, like why am I thinking deep now?
Because it really is. It's a great point, because again, there's a large contingent, like the research is very clear on this among Generation Z as well as millennials, largely just aren't going to church right now. They just have decided that according to research, they just think they know what they're talking about. They think they know God. They think they have an idea of the divine, and they don't necessarily need the community that exists within the body of Christ. And so what you're doing, though, is almost missionary work, right? Like you're utilizing the talents that God has given you, and you're doing so in an excellent fashion in order that they wouldn't have to go to you, but you would go to them as well. Right?
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I never even thought about it.
Yeah. So So tell us, where can we find out more information on your tour? Where can we find out more information on you specifically, and track where you're going after you leave this studio and then beyond in the years to come?
Yeah. So you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at @SSavageFlows.
Okay.
So Steven Savage, but like without the rest of my first name. So just @SSavageFlows, FLOWS. I post like a lot of updates on that, a lot of information on that, and then also follow my mom's Facebook, because she always posts about me. I tell you all the time, people say they know what I'm doing because they know her. So
I love
that's
that.
just a joke. My mom's probably not going to accept friend requests from people who she doesn't know.
It's crying shame.
That's fine. Shame. It's okay.
You know what? Just making friends. Making friends.
100%.
Well, I love it. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a delight, and I want to continue to encourage our listeners to. I can vouch for this guy personally, and listening to some of his stuff he's a talented individual that God has entrusted with much, and he is being faithful with that, and really excited for what 3 days is going to look like as when he drops the album, and the excitement that's going to generate around that. So I want to encourage you right now, listeners. I'm talking to you right now. Go to our website, pointofview.net. Go and find Stephen's picture on the show notes. Go to Stephen's picture, download, pre-order the album, so that on May 10th, when you wake up in the morning, you can listen to more of Stephen Savage and his album, Woven. We've got to take a break, but when we come back from the break, we're gonna continue talking a little bit about what we picked up on at the beginning of the hour, specifically racism in the U.S., as well as talk about the legacy of Rachel Held Evans. We'll be back right after this.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts. Hey, welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you have decided to join us for this, the third hour of the Millennial Roundtable. I know what you're thinking right now, listeners. You're thinking to yourselves, but is it Wednesday? It's not Wednesday. It's Tuesday. This is the first Millennial Roundtable that we will be hosting and continue to host herein until the foreseeable future on Tuesdays now. And so grateful that you have decided to join us, because we have moved on up in the week. And so for those of you that were listening during the first hour, I failed to properly sing it, because I thought if I started singing moving on up, you all would tune out. And so I didn't even try to sing it this time, but now I'm just explaining it. And all of
Jokes
the words
are always better when you have to explain them.
Yeah, I know. I just want to be able to explain everything. What can I say? That's just who I am. And that's why you all love me, right? I hope so. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We joined at the Millennial Roundtable. We've got Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute, as well as David Fraga here in the Dallas area. And so we have been talking about all sorts of things. Specifically, we were talking about during the first hour the rise of racism right now, what we continue to see in the U.S., pointing out the instances of what happened all the way in California a couple of weeks ago, the anti-Semitic attack on a Jewish synagogue that left 2 individuals dead, 4 injured, to what happened in Tennessee just yesterday. A chief of staff for the Speaker of the House in the Tennessee State House resigned yesterday after it was found out that he used cocaine in his office, as well as he, sent racist text messages, as well as sent racist messages over social media. And then what also happened in Georgia, where you have a Georgia mayor right outside of Atlanta that pulled the application from a position that they were looking to fill because, quote, he was black. And then also that led to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution interviewing a city council member in that city, and him beginning to spout off on what's known as kinism, the idea that God intended for the races to be separate, and kinism taking root around 2004, and some even pointing back to a kind of the biblical misinterpretation, as well as just an evil thought of racism, utilizing the biblical narrative of some pointing to the curse of Ham in Genesis 9. And the reality of the matter, as those of us that are following after Jesus, and the Jesus that's revealed in the scriptures, that even Jesus himself said in John 5:38, that you search these scriptures that you might inherit eternal life. But I tell you, they testify about me. The very scriptures that Jesus says in Matthew 5:17, that I haven't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law. The scriptures that Jesus, that the writer of Hebrews says that Jesus, being the one that is the image of the invisible God, that Jesus doesn't play favorites. The biblical narrative indicates that in Jesus, there is no Greek nor Gentile, there's no slave nor free man. All are one in Christ Jesus our Lord. And racism does not exist in the biblical narrative. Jesus is calling us to be able to see each other as we are, individuals that have been purchased by the blood of Christ. And as such, we should not play favorites, nor should we denigrate others in order to be able to satisfy those fleshly longings that have racist tendencies in us. And so we've been talking a little bit about racism, but also I want to kind of shift gears a little bit, and I want to talk about specifically during this first hour, I want to talk about Rachel Held Evans. So for some of our listeners, you'll be familiar with Miss Evans. She she was a Christian writer, a progressive Christian writer is how Fox News kind of described her. She was an individual that very much existed on the outside of the margins. In April of this year, she was put into a medically induced coma, and because of medically induced coma, and she never got out of that coma. She passed away this weekend at the young age of 37 years old. She's a mom of 2, and she leaves behind a husband, Dan, as well as 2 children. And it's been interesting. It's such a tragic circumstance, but it's been so heartwarming to see just the testimony that has come out about her. Chelsey, are you familiar with Rachel at all?
I mean, of course I've heard of her, but
Yeah.
I'm not, personally familiar with
Yeah.
her. But, it's just devastating when someone who's such an intellectual and really just like a powerhouse for the gospel, just, it was her time.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, David, I don't know how familiar you are with her, and she was one for those of us that are more on the conservative side from a theological perspective. She was very much. She was so brilliant, and she was so sharp, and she had such pointed questions because, like Jacob, she was wrestling with the God of wisdom, and she walked with a holy limp of just someone that had been with Jesus, had wrestled with the text. And so she just would ask such pointed questions towards some of the traditions as well as some of the doctrine that many conservatives held pretty closely. And she was so fierce, and she was so a woman of valor is one of the phrases I continued to see populate. And it's just such a tragic loss for Christianity, and that God would call her home so early. I'm just kind of at a loss for words when trying to describe her. Your thoughts?
Right. So I looked into her a little bit, and it's just amazing how she would be someone to ask a lot of tough questions as well as just write about them. But I know I just never really knew her too well, but I know if someone that I look up to would all of a sudden pass away in such a way that's unexpected. And I know it's such a devastating loss, even though she had a huge impact on thousands, right, if not millions. But
Yeah,
it's
I
amazing.
think that's one of the interesting things about Rachel is that, especially for our audience that has been with us for a little bit, we disagreed over quite a few things. Her stance on LGBT issues within the church, I thought I disagreed with her on that. Kind of the role of women in the church, I think we had some minor disagreements on. But one of the things I so appreciated about Rachel is that she was so brave in her opinion, and she's always substantiated her opinion in the biblical narrative. And so even if you disagreed with her, you had to thank her because she forced you to go back to the text to be able to wrestle with the text. And she she took God up on the invitation to come and to disagree with me, come and let us discuss those things. And I thought that was such I am better for it. Because I think, Chelsey, I think we would all agree that the individuals that largely are the individuals that sharp us and shape us are those individuals that we don't necessarily agree with all the time, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's just, it's always sad and tragic, but at the same time, if her faith was in Christ, we know that she's in a better place, and we know hopefully, ultimately her life, and even at the end of the life, that this will all point back to God and glorify God, and have people asking, seeing her name and saying, who is that? And what was she about? And, learning more about God at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think there's 2 books in particular that I thought were just so interesting. Like she broke out onto the scene because of her book, A Year of Biblical Womanhood, where she literally obeyed all the commands relative to women in the biblical narrative, all the way back from the Old Testament as well. And so she did that for a year. And so and then she reported on it. It was a New York Times bestseller. And so there's even certain parts where she would leave her house. If you're getting what I'm saying right now, she would leave her house once a month, and she would just go camp out in her front yard. She would just live it out, and then she wrote a book about it. It was just fascinating. So there's that book, and we'll talk more about that, as well as Searching for Sunday, which is another phenomenal book. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
The Supreme Court justices may be forgiven for having a feeling of deja vu. For the third time, the justices had to deal with a case in which the president was given power by Congress and then challenged because he used that power. First, it was the travel ban. Then it was the president's national emergency declaration in order to build the wall. Finally, it were the oral arguments about whether a citizenship question should be put in the 2020 census. All three of these cases have a number of things in common. The Constitution grants certain powers to Congress. Congress delegates those powers to the president. Then President Trump uses those powers in a way that Democrats don't like, and a federal court case ensues. You probably have already thought of a solution to this ongoing problem. Congress should stop delegating their power to the president. I'll deal with that topic in my next commentary, but you might wonder why Congress keeps doing this. Here's a secret that few political commentators mention. When the leader of your party is in power, you don't have a problem when he uses that power. But as soon as someone of the other party, especially if it's Donald Trump, gets into power, you go crazy. This case before the Supreme Court should be fairly simple. Congress delegated to the Secretary of Commerce the power to determine the form and content of the census. You may not like what he decided, but that's what the law stipulated decades ago. David Fraga, in a recent commentary, says here is where we see the biggest contrast between progressive and conservative approaches to jurisprudence. The liberal progressive sees the problem and demands the court fix the problem. The conservative looks at the same pattern and says, if you don't like the law, change it. Congress has had numerous opportunities to change the law and did not. Therefore, I predict that at least 5 conservative justices on the court will rule in favor of the Trump administration. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you have decided to join us. We've got in studio Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute and David Fraga. We've been talking about Rachel Held Evans. And so for those of you that were aware, over the weekend, Miss Evans lost her life to a medical disease. And so she left behind a family, specifically a father, or not her father, yes, from Lee University, as well as she left behind a husband, Dan, and then 2 children. And so she was just the young age of 37 years old, and she was best known. She was a best-selling author, progressive Christian, according to Fox News, is how they kind of identified her, best known for writing books such as Searching for Sunday, Faith Unraveled. And I think one of the things that I was so appreciative of, and also it just seems so ironic now looking back on it, is one of her first books that she released was A Year of Biblical Womanhood, where she really did press in and really decided that in this book she was just going to chronicle her year of heeding every biblical command relative to women, Old Testament and New Testament. And so that meant everything from making her own clothes to rising before dawn, to leaving the house at certain times, to when she went to church, she was completely quiet. And this book just chronicles her and the entirety of her year and the conclusions from it. And one of the conclusions I went back to, and I quoted in the daily briefing yesterday, is this. She said, quote, "I've come to regard with some suspicion those who claim that the Bible never troubles them. I can only assume this means they haven't actually read it." And Chelsey, I think one of the things that I so appreciate about Evans is, even though we didn't always agree on every particular issue, she was an individual that forced you to go back to the biblical narrative to make you understand, one, is what I'm believing and what I'm standing upon, is it what I really believe?
Mm-hmm.
And she refused to allow talking points and some of those phrases to kind of perpetuate and kind of populate conversations. And I those are the type of people that make me better, because they won't let me just settle by with what has been said before, right?
Right. You know, we can all disagree on certain aspects of our beliefs or even, you know, political views. But at the end of the day, anyone that makes you chase after truth and get to the scriptural truth and aspect, I mean, that's a glory to God.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah, one of the things I identified David, and I don't know if you can resonate. She was one of those people. She had a book, Searching for Sunday, and she had just become a little disenchanted with the way that church had been done. And so this really was a book that really did appeal to the marginalized, to the individuals that really were kind of fed up. She was an individual herself that grew up in a conservative evangelical home, left evangelicalism a few years back, and became an Episcopalian. But one of the things that she wrote that I thought was just so poignant, she said, quote, "If you want to do violence in this world, you'll always find the weapons. If you want to heal, you'll always find the balm." She was a woman that ran her race well to such an extent that it caused others to walk. You know, she is an individual that really did do a significant amount of work for those that had little or no faith whatsoever. And she appealed to them in such a way that really did testify to the goodness of God. And I don't know if you've ever interacted with those individuals, but man, she will be missed, regardless of whether you agreed with her.
Yeah, I think it's so remarkable. And just adding on to that, anytime someone is going to stir you up, and talks about that in Hebrews, they're pointing to Christ. That means all glory is going to Christ. You know, that is amazing, because you said running the race. And I think part of that running the race is, why are you running it? And she was like, I'm running the race for Christ, and this is my purpose, right? So I love that. I love how she embraces that pressure.
And I don't know if you all have ever had one of those friends that just refuses. She just refuses the try. Like one of the things that was beautiful things that was happening on social media over the weekend, and then even into Monday, is because of RHE, Rachel Held Evans. And so it's all these hashtags and tweets that were sent out about the kind little things that she did for other authors, about how she gave over her platform, about how she would send them a quick little note. Like this woman that had millions of people that were following after her spent the time to write these encouraging little notes to individuals that were writing these blog posts and saying, I really got something from that, or I was really encouraged by that. Like this idea of the value of just those little words that are spoken, though they might not be publicized very loudly, they hold such currency in that moment. I think that's just a testament, I guess, in our world too, right, Chelsey? Just you can't forget about just those little things that you can do that really can make a world of difference.
Yes, I mean, just to be thoughtful and caring for others, but also to not be so absorbed in whatever you're doing, but to like get out of your realm and think about others. That's just incredible. So that's really cool. I mean, one can only hope that people respond that way after anyone passes. They would have those things to say.
Yeah, very good. Well, let's transition a little bit, because one of the things that I think is appropriate to be able to talk about when discussing her is the great work that she did, or the great questions that she was asking relative to kind of the current state of affairs, one might be able to say. And we had some phone calls before we had Stephen on, and so we're going to continue to go back to those phone calls relative to the racial situation right now. And so we've been talking about this idea of racism becoming increasingly, it's seeming as though it's becoming more pervasive here in the U.S. right now. And we're pointing back to some of the rise of anti-Semitism, which is just so clear in the research as well as in our headlines, but then also some of these other things that are happening relative to Georgia right now, where there was a councilman that said that couldn't believe that it makes his blood boil when individuals interracial marriage just makes his blood boil, or the mayor of a Georgian town saying that she pulled the application because the individual was black, or the chief of staff in Tennessee that said that he used cocaine in his office, as well as had racial text messages that were found find out. And so it points back to what I would contend is just this rise of racism. And Chelsey, one of the things that you were alluding to is just the kind of the I don't even want to actually I don't we won't go in that direction, shall we? So one of the things I'm still just trying to figure out, what are some of the contributions, what are some of those sources that are causing this, or at least our awareness, or the fact that racism is still around right now. It's just one of those things that's so perplexing to me, because it seems as though we should be so far removed from this, because this was something that I thought we had eradicated in the 60s, but it still seems to be peeking its head out.
Well, we eradicated institutionalized versions of it.
Okay.
So the laws have changed. We had a civil war to we had constitutional amendments. But, that doesn't mean that the culture has come as far as the law. And the goal is to get the culture to have a heart and mind change on these issues. And in order to do that, we have to acknowledge them. We have to enter in discussions that might be intimidating or uncomfortable, and seek to understand. But ultimately, we also have to hold these individuals accountable for their viewpoints and their words. What's surprising to me is these are elected officials. So my question is, are they saying these things because they think their constituents also have these viewpoints? Well, that's indicative of a much bigger problem. If these are not just isolated incidences, but widespread viewpoints that their constituents hold, we really, especially the church, has a duty to call that is injustice, and to disciple on the issue. We're called to love our brothers and sisters. So it's disheartening to me.
So David, as a guy that's in the church right now that does men's ministry in a church, are you encountering some of this racist tendencies in your area? Are you seeing there are challenges to individuals relative to the racial situation here in the U.S.?
I would say here in the U.S., yes. At my church, I don't really see any kind of challenges with that. I think my church is pretty diverse, and I've seen that within the staff, within people who come into the doors of over at the Dallas campus. But we did talk about that statistic where you can see how there's a lot of division within churches that are dominantly one race, for the most part, like 80%, you said. And so I'm curious to see whether that is just to divide oneself in order to protect kind of like my people, quote unquote, or is that, just because it's in a neighborhood that's just the population, the demographic of it. So I'm curious about that too.
Yeah, well, we're gonna have to take a break, but when we come back, we're gonna continue taking some of your phone calls. So we had to stop taking phone calls because Stephen was was here in studio, and so I'd love to hear your opinion on the racial situation here in the U.S. What is contributing to some of these stories? Or I'm going to work out of the assumption that racism is on the rise right now, if not publicly, then privately. And what is contributing to that rise right now? You can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212 right now. Or if you think that racism's not on the rise, convince me that it's not. You can call in there, 800-351-1212, or you get on Facebook, facebook.com/Point of View Radio. You share your questions, comments online. We'll share them over air. Be back right after this.
It's amazing but true. When it comes to one of America's biggest household expenditures, healthcare, a lot of people think they've got no choice. People are used to thinking we have to do it this way, but they don't. Yes, you have the freedom to choose an alternative with your healthcare. It's MediShare, and it costs way less than the alternatives. The typical family saves $500 a month, not a year. A month. And if you're single, this can save you a lot too. And let's face it, a big reason MediShare is 400,000 people strong, it just works. They've shared over $3 billion in medical bills, so they can help share your needs too. Joining MediShare for so many people is one of those things that makes you say, why didn't I do this before? So yes, the time has come for something better. Look into joining MediShare and see why so many people are opting out of the old way and into the new. Why not look into this? Just call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute, as well as David Fraga. Sorry, getting my words a little confused. 2.5 hours into this thing. You'd think I'd have this down by now, but apparently I don't. We have been talking a little bit about racism. I guess maybe I'm just making it a conversation right now as much as it is a conversation. But I think it's just happening. I think it's a lot more prevalent than what I think that any of us would be comfortable with. It's happening. And I'm really interested as to why it's still happening. I'm operating underneath the assumption that we know more. And not only do we know more, but we know better. But yet it still continues to happen. And we've seen it happen just this week with the text messages that got revealed in Tennessee by the chief of staff in the Tennessee State House, specifically the Speaker of the House's office. And then we also see it happening in Georgia right now. And so I'd be interested to hear what you have to say. Do you think racism is on the rise here in the U.S.? And if so, why is it on the rise? And if not, then help convince me as to why you think it's not on the rise.
Well, just to throw in a few statistics from the Pew Research Center, they had a study come out that said, as opposed to 10 years ago, twice as many Americans think that racism is a big issue today than they did 10 years ago. And that's across party lines, it's across ethnicities. Now, there are some that view it, 80% of Democrats think that it's a big issue versus 40, but across both Republicans, but across both party lines, everyone can agree that it's increased. And then there was an FBI study we cited earlier that said hate crimes have been on the increase. And I also want to broaden this to anti-Semitism. And I think there are other types of racism that are also on the rise that have been supported statistically, even worldwide.
Yeah, I completely agree. The rise of hate crimes, I think, is one measure that we can utilize, but also I think there's some other issues. And so we'd love to hear from you. 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or jump over on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. You share a comment or question online. We'll try to get to it over the air. And so right now, we're going to take a phone call. We got someone actually that's in Georgia right now. So we've got Alberto in Georgia. Are you there, Alberto?
Nick, thank you for taking my call. I love the show.
Oh, well, thank you so much for the kind words. The check is in the mail for that kind comment that I owe you. I owe you now. So what's your point of view, Alberto?
Well, my point of view, first and foremost, I'm a Puerto Rican American. I'm a born-again believer. I was led to Christ by a small country preacher in Lawrence, South Carolina by the name of Dr. Bill McDonald. He was a man that looked beyond my race, my geographical upbringing, and he saw my need for Christ as a juvenile delinquent growing up in the northern New Jersey, New York City area. And I saw the love of God in this man, and the love of God reached me through the Holy Spirit. I can tell you that living in the extreme northeast and now in the southeast, I'm married to a Southern belle, and my children ask me all the time, Dad, am I Puerto Rican or am I American? I tell them you're both. And I can tell you that in my lifetime, I'm the son of a United States soldier who served during the Cuban Missile Crisis. My family's an Army family. My uncle fought in the Korean War. I have struggled with the word minority and majority, and we both know that that's just a difference in numbers. Ultimately, we have to take a hard look and know that Jesus himself suffered discrimination. And we have to expect as believers that we're going to experience that in this world that we live in because of the sin of pride. Ultimately, in my opinion, I can tell you that living in the extreme northeast or southeast, that it comes down to pride, the pride of the heart, the pride of believing that your race, your nationality is better than the other one. And we have to be very careful when we paint the picture of immigration and that topic that is being spoken about on a regular basis by our nation, that we can't paint the picture of immigration of just a Mexican family. We have to be fair in our assessment and talk about what's happening at the Canadian border and the other races that are immigrating into our country illegally. But ultimately, we are all of the same human race. We all are made in the image of God, and we all come from one race. And I believe that the biggest issue is Satan using the rhetoric about the pride of life and people believing that they're better than others. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
All right, thank you so much, Alberto. We appreciate your phone call. We're going to continue on with the phone call. We've got Rochelle in Ohio right now. Rochelle, are you there?
Yes. And I totally agree with that last caller. And what I had said earlier was that we're all called to love one another. Should we defend each other as long as we're doing it in love? And if we're walking close with the Lord and asking Him to help our words be His words with love and kindness, and He says in His word that He will vindicate us and He will defend us. And but Alberto said, you know, there's really nothing more for me to say because he spoke the truth also.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Rochelle. We greatly appreciate what you have to say. I think Rochelle brings up a great point, especially in our conversation. One of the things that I've been keenly convicted of and aware of is the need for individuals to be that speak up, what I would consider allies. The biblical narrative that always points out and that percolates with inside of me when I think about this particular issue is in 1 Kings 21, you've got an individual, King Ahab, who what we know from the biblical narrative is just a very wicked, evil, deceitful king. And then you've got Jezebel, his wife, and what Ahab wants is land that's right beside the palace. But unfortunately for Ahab, there's an individual named Naboth that has that land. Naboth has that land, and what the king does is the king utilizes his power, and then the queen, Jezebel, utilizes her wit and her wherewithal to organize two men that the text tells us are worthless and deceitful to stand up before the city court. And they stand up before the city court and they curse and they lay blame on false accusations to Naboth. And in that moment, now Naboth is outnumbered 3-1, one being the king, two being the worthless individuals. Those are three individuals to stand up against Naboth. Naboth's word doesn't hold. In that moment, Naboth needed an ally. Naboth needed somebody to stand up for him and to say that this was wrong. In similar instances, we need to speak up. There needs to be individuals that are allies for our brothers and sisters in Christ Jesus, so that when we continue to hear some of these racist remarks that continue to populate the headlines, we need to stand up and say this isn't right. And I think one of the things that troubles me, Chelsey, and we've gone back and forth on this, is the reality that there are individuals that twist the biblical narrative to be able to justify these unbiblical thoughts. And it just is, it's infuriating to me because one, they're misaligning the word of God, and that two, there's not individuals that are surrounding them that are willing to speak up on behalf of individuals that are of other ethnicities. It's befuddling to me.
Yeah, and just to be clear, you and I don't disagree on that. We haven't gone back and forth. We definitely agree that that's not what Christ and the gospel is about. It's about what our callers have mentioned, which is this is a heart issue about loving others. And to me, it's the church's job and our job as the church collectively to talk about these issues and engage. And it's going to be difficult, and we might not be well equipped or do it always right, but they're important issues that we can't bury our head in the sand on. And I think I said this last hour, but there was a church in the area when the Black Lives Matter movement happened, and the Dallas PD had been targeted and shot down. This church really started addressing the race issue and had a series on it, and they had a panel that church members could ask questions and begin a dialogue and begin a healing. And that is part of the healing process for our nation that needs to continue to happen. And I wish that I had seen that. The church really needs to lean in on hard issues, and not just this issue, pro-life issues. The churches aren't talking about the pro-life issue. Yeah. Like, there are so many issues that aren't like social or aren't political. They're human issues, and they matter. And the Bible has something to say about it. Christ has something to say about it. and it's on us to bring hearts and minds along to discuss really hard topics.
Yeah, it was similar to one of the things. One of the stories that just always runs in my mind is with Jacob, right? So Jacob in the middle of the night wrestled with the angel of the Lord. His name was changed and he walked away with a limp. I think we need to do more wrestling, and we need to walk around changed and walk around with a limp so that we have something to be able to say because we've wrestled with the biblical text. But we're going to take a break right now. But when we come back from the break, we're going to change topics a little bit. I'm beginning to think I want to introduce segments, and we've got a new segment that we're going to be talking about, specifically social science fun times. And so I don't know, that name is not going to stick, obviously, because that's not
terrible.
That's a terrible name. Like literally, if you looked up the worst possible name for a segment, that would be it. And so we'll be back right after.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. This episode really begins back in May of 2017. That's when President Donald Trump, just 3 months into his presidency, walked to the Rose Garden of the White House and signed the executive order promoting free speech and religious liberty. That executive order commissioned a memo offering guidance to the executive branch by then Attorney General of the United States, Jeff Sessions. Several months later, the Department of Justice issued that guidance and about a year later held a summit on religious liberty at DOJ headquarters announcing the formation of a religious liberty task force. That task force provided on-the-ground guidance to executive agencies like the Department of Education, which now brings us to the point of this episode. Secretary Betsy DeVos recently sent a letter to Congress explaining that the Department of Education would no longer enforce a federal statute prohibiting religious organizations from providing educational services to students. DeVos noted that the decision by the Supreme Court of the United States in Trinity Lutheran versus Comer, as explained by the DOJ in former Attorney General Sessions' memo, requires federal law to permit religious organizations to participate at the same level as secular organizations. I agree with Secretary DeVos, who said, those seeking to provide high-quality educational services to students and teachers should not be discriminated against simply based on the religious character of their organization. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, and we've got David Fraga and Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute here for the last little stretch. And I don't know if you heard right before the break, but I introduced the absolute worst name possible for a segment. And so, like, here, bear with me. Okay, so for those of you that have been listening, one of the things that I'm trying to become more aware of, I'm trying to introduce I want to introduce a recurring segment since it's this new Tuesday. And so I'm thinking we can call it the social science segment. Maybe we can go, it's like SSS. Get it, Chelsey? Maybe that. Maybe it's just like the human interest segment, or maybe news you
News
need
you
to
could
know.
lose.
News you could lose. News you could lose. Maybe that could be.
I
it.
like it.
Okay, so what we're trying to do now is if for those of you that are one that you've been listening, or two that subscribe to the daily briefing, one of the things that I like to do is I like just to put in some of these human interest, social science surveys, studies that explain human nature. Those everyday things that we're just kind of aware of, but now we can put numbers to, or we have a concept that we can get behind. And so I want to introduce that, and I want us to make this a recurring theme. So this is going to happen. Maybe news you can use, or news you can lose, or news you can lose.
News you could lose because you don't really need to know it, but it's kind of interesting.
Okay, news you can lose. Okay, so here we go.
Roll with that.
In our first news you can lose segment, we're going to go, how unsanitary is it to kiss your pet on the mouth? Okay, and so this was a study that was published in Self magazine. According to one clinical professor of pathology, he says, on overall level of cleanliness, kissing your pet's mouth is, quote, not good. There's a wide variety of illnesses that could possibly get from kissing a cat or a dog on the mouth.
Rabies,
but
maybe.
If you were to catch anything, which again is rare, probably unpleasant. It's a gastrointestinal illness.
Ew.
And so,
Goodness.
okay, so here we go.
This is such a loser news.
Okay, so let's go ahead. We're going to put it out there for both of you. You're going on the record right now.
Snap.
Do you allow your dog to kiss you on the mouth?
Mm-mm.
No?
No. I cannot.
Andrew, our producer, he is all in. He's got both hands
Yeah,
up.
I'm going to be a hard no on that.
You're a hard no.
Hard no. I have 2 dogs,
Okay.
and that's not.
Couldn't do it.
Okay, so then here's the second question, though. Do you allow them to kiss you on the face, to lick your face?
No.
No?
No. I'm going to get calls about this, I'm sure.
No kiss on the face.
Nope.
Okay. Do you allow hands?
Like lick your hands?
Lick your hands.
Yeah, I mean.
Look, I try to avoid all lick contact with the dogs,
Okay.
but I love them and I pet them a lot, and they're great, but they're still animals
Okay,
to me.
so here's the numbers behind it. So 79% allow their dog to lick them on the hands. 58% allow them to lick on their feet. 52% allow them to lick on your face. 39% allow them to lick off the plate.
Gross. Oh, gross.
Off the plate?
You could clean that, though. Like, that's.
Would you allow your
Maybe I'm a
dog to eat
germaphobe.
off the plate?
No.
And then you to continue to eat off the plate?
Oh,
David?
no.
No?
No,
Okay.
I could not do that. I'm
But
not
then
done. I'm done.
here's the
David
thing.
has some standards.
Here's the thing that I thought was so
Oh, yeah.
fascinating, because again, this just kind of, I'm just going to go and be honest, put myself out there. Like 17% said they allow their dog to lick them on the lips. And knowing where dogs lick, I think that's very disgusting in my eyes. But maybe I'm wrong on this. Okay, so but here's some numbers behind it. So 89.7 million Americans own dogs. 48% of the population own a dog. A recent survey found that pet owners love their dogs more than other people. Have you all met those type of people that are just like enamored with their dogs?
Yes, I've met those people.
Yeah. Are you the type of person that considers your dog a member of your family? Maybe that's a more pressing question.
I think yes.
Okay.
I would say yes, just because they're always around your family, especially if you have kids. I know how they could bond with them, and so it's like a part of your family.
Yeah, I love my pets, but look, I think things change. And my coworker used to always tell me this: oh, the minute you have kids, your view on your dogs will change. And I used to be like, oh, I love my dogs. I take them to the dog park. Yeah, they're just pets now. Like compared to the kids, like it's just I love them. They're great. They're part of the family. But they have their place, and it doesn't. It's all about the kids for me.
So they're not a family member.
No, they're a family member. They're just a pet family member.
Okay,
they're not a human family member.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the study indicated that 84.7% say that yes, their pet is a family member. Okay, so here's the next question. Okay, because I think this is fun. Okay, so does your pet
until I get hate mail? It's all fun and games until I get hate mail. Until PETA starts calling me.
Does your pet sleep in your bed?
I'm not opposed to it, but it depends. At the feet, at the foot of the bed.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Why is that an issue?
No, it's no.
Okay, so
it's a cleanliness thing.
Does your pet sleep in your bed? Well, according to the research, for women, 57% said yes. For men, 55% said yes. Okay. And so here we'll go with the, I thought this was a hilarious one. Do you call your,
I do love them, guys.
do you call your dog a
beds.
fur baby? I thought that was, or perhaps this is like the best one. Do you compliment your dog?
Well, every day. Yeah.
Every day.
He needs some self-esteem.
So you say they're cute?
Yeah, I think they're cute. One's really fluffy. One's a doodle. He's like a border collie poodle mix, and he's just the smartest. He's like a little child. He thinks he is.
Okay.
Very smart. The other is she uses her brilliance for evil.
Does she really?
Wow.
Yeah, she's border collie Jack Russell, and we knew nothing about Jack Russells when we got her.
Yeah.
They're nuts.
Yeah, they
but
are.
she's good.
Yeah, my dad
they're
has
good.
one.
Awesome.
Yeah, my dad was. Patches,
Is so cute. Mine's Piper.
Yeah,
Piper
Patches.
and W after George W. Bush.
Patches runs about 100 million miles an hour. It can jump as fast as a speeding bullet.
Mine jumps 8-foot fences regularly. We had to get a special fence for her.
Really, 8 foot? That's impressive.
Yeah, she is impressive, but
that's impressive.
Yeah, she's crazy.
Okay, so here's the last one
kids.
because this was in the Wall Street Journal as well this morning. There's such a thing as called canine streetwear now. Canine streetwear,
Tell me now.
where you are dressing up your dog to take them out on the street. And so there's actual streetwear for your dogs now. And so this...
Honestly, in a world where people are not having kids anymore, just go have some kids.
Okay.
Yeah,
So hold
spend your time and money elsewhere.
Hold on, Judge Judy. Hold on, Judge Judy.
I know, I am Judge Judy right now.
Okay, so have you ever dressed up your dog before?
For Halloween,
Okay.
Piper got a taco costume. And it was the cutest little thing I've ever seen.
Awesome.
Okay.
Yeah, but for Halloween.
Okay, it's appropriate.
And
for
we had a
Halloween.
Halloween party, so like everyone needed to be in costume.
Yeah. I think it depends. You know, you might have like a big dog and, you know, it's game night. And so, or you're going to watch a football game. You want to put that college jersey on.
Okay.
I feel like that's pretty cool. That's cool. That's
I'll
acceptable.
allow it. I'll
allow that.
But streetwear, like,
Yes,
hey, I'm going to dress this dog in a tutu
or
to
like
go
with
for a walk.
booties or whatever it's called. Like
Lord.
those shoes.
Nah.
I can't do that.
Do you give your dog human food?
Yeah, they get some steak every now and then.
Some good steak.
Do you
Yeah,
really?
leftovers.
Okay. You guys
Not
win.
from my plate, as we've established.
Okay, so that's one of the things. Like
After you're done, right?
so for our listeners, just so you know, I didn't grow up with a dog. Like we had a gerbil named Speedy for about 2 weeks, and then it very quickly became apparent that my brother and I
You lost it.
were
You
not
lost it,
very
didn't you?
good with. We're
I
not
lost
very
a
good
Prince
with-
gerbil once.
Yeah, and so R.I.P. Speedy. So we didn't have pets, but now I'm in a house and I've got some housemates, some guys, and so all Aggies went to Texas A&M, and we have a dog now. And so I am quickly learning the life of having a dog in the house and realizing that we need some type of robot vacuum cleaner because the thing always sheds. But that's a whole different story. But that was news you can lose.
Yeah.
I think that's going to stick.
I hope we didn't lose the listeners, though. Sorry, guys.
Right? It's interesting, you know?
But nevertheless, we've got to go. We've got to go. This has been your first. This has been the initial Tuesday Millennial Roundtable. We're so thankful that you decided to join us. Please go over to the Facebook page, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Be sure to like the page, follow us along. And Kirby will be back here tomorrow. I want to go ahead and say thank you so much, David, Chelsey, for showing up. So grateful for your contributions to argue with me, Chelsey, even though we didn't argue as much as I would prefer.
Solidarity today.
Maybe next week. And then we'll also thank you so much to Andrew and Steve in the back. All righty. We'll see you here tomorrow.
It's amazing but true. When it comes to one of America's biggest household expenditures, healthcare, a lot of people think they've got no choice. People are used to thinking we have to do it this way, but they don't. Yes, you have the freedom to choose an alternative with your healthcare. It's MediShare, and it costs way less than the alternatives. The typical family saves $500 a month, not a year, a month. And if you're single, this can save you a lot too. And let's face it, a big reason MediShare is 400,000 people strong, it just works. They've shared over $3 billion in medical bills, so they can help share your needs too. Joining MediShare for so many people is one of those things that makes you say, why didn't I do this before? So yes, the time has come for something better. Look into joining MediShare and see why so many people are opting out of the old way and into the new. Why not look into this? Just call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.